You stand in the garden where the roses are dying, the petals browning at the edges like old paper held too close to flame, and the October light falls across southern Germany with a peculiar quality, golden and mournful, the kind of light that seems to know something you do not yet admit to yourself. The air tastes of autumn and ash, of endings approaching with the slow inevitability of winter. The year is 1944, though time has become strange to you, measured not in days but in the accumulation of suspicions, in the weight of silences that grow heavier each morning when you wake. You are Erwin Rommel, 52 years old, though the pain from your skull fracture makes you feel ancient as the stones beneath your feet. Field Marshal, the desert fox, the man who once commanded armies across the sand seas of North Africa, where temperatures climbed to 47 degrees Celsius and the horizon shimmered with mirages that promised water and delivered only more sun, more heat, more endless distance. But that was another life, another version of yourself that exists now only in newspaper clippings and propaganda photographs, in the mythology of the brilliant tactician who almost broke the British at El Alamein. Here, in Herlingen, in this modest house 50 kilometers from Ulm in the soft hills of Baden-Württemberg, you are something else, something smaller and more human, and infinitely more dangerous to the regime you once served with the particular fervor of a soldier who believed that duty and honor were synonymous, that following orders was the highest expression of patriotism. The garden is your refuge, has been your refuge since July, when the British Spitfire caught your staff car on that road near Sainte-Foy-de-Montgomery in Normandy, when the bullets and fragments turned the world into noise and pain, and the sensation of your skull cracking like an eggshell struck too hard. 3 fractures, the doctors said, fragments of bone pressed against the brain, your left eye swollen shut for weeks, your face a canvas of purple and yellow bruises that have only now begun to fade into something resembling normal human coloring. You walk slowly, your balance still uncertain, your head throbbing with the dull ache that has become your constant companion. The roses sway in the October breeze, their stems thorned and unforgiving, and you think about how something so beautiful requires such sharp defenses, how nature understands what you are only now beginning to learn, that vulnerability and violence exist in the same space, that the soft petal and the hard thorn grow from the same source. Your wife, Lucy, watches from the window. You can feel her gaze like sunlight on the back of your neck, worried and constant. She knows something is wrong, has known since the men from Berlin began appearing with their careful questions and their eyes that see too much, since the phone calls that come at odd hours and end abruptly when you enter the room, since the letters that arrive and disappear before you can ask their contents. Your son, Manfred, 15 years old and already tall enough to look you almost in the eye, practices with his model aircraft in the yard, building and rebuilding the small planes with the focused intensity you recognize from yourself at that age, when the world seemed comprehensible through mechanics and mathematics, when cause and effect followed logical progression and honor meant something clear and uncomplicated. The silence is a living thing here. It fills the spaces between birdsong, between the rustle of dying leaves, between your heartbeats that continue their steady rhythm despite everything, despite the knowledge that sits in your stomach like a stone. In Berlin,
550 kilometers to the north, they are making decisions about your fate in rooms you will never see, using logic you can almost understand. The logic of regimes that cannot tolerate doubt, that must eliminate uncertainty with the surgical precision of a blade across a throat. You do not think of yourself as a traitor. The word feels foreign in your mouth, tastes wrong, like fruit that has begun to rot from the inside. But you know what they know, that you spoke too freely about the impossibility of winning, about the madness of continuing a war already lost, about the necessity of negotiating peace before Germany becomes a graveyard decorated with the corpses of its own children. You know about the plot, the July 20th attempt on Hitler's life at the Wolf's Lair in Rustenburg, though you were not part of it, never asked to be part of it, were lying in a hospital bed with your shattered skull when Colonel Stauffenberg placed the briefcase beneath the table and walked away believing he had killed a dictator. But proximity is guilt, association is complicity, and the Gestapo does not require proof when suspicion will suffice. The sun begins its descent, and you stand among the dying roses, breathing the October air, waiting for what comes next.
You wake each morning to the sound of uncertainty, not birds or bells or the ordinary percussion of a household stirring to life, but the deeper sound beneath sound, the almost silence that precedes revelation. Your bedroom in Hurlingen faces east, and the dawn comes reluctantly through the curtains, pale and hesitant, as if light itself has learned caution in these final months of 1944. The headaches are worst in the morning, a consequence of the skull fractures that turned your brain into something fragile, something that sloshes against bone like water in a cracked vessel. The doctors have told you that recovery will take months, perhaps longer, perhaps never fully. They speak in the careful language of men who understand that your body is no longer merely your body, but a political problem, a question of timing and usefulness to a regime that measures human worth in units of military efficiency. You move through the house like a ghost haunting its own life, touching the furniture that Lucy has arranged with such care, the photographs on the mantel showing a younger version of yourself in dress uniform, medals gleaming like promises you believed when they were first pinned to your chest. There is a picture from North Africa, 1942, you standing beside your command vehicle with that slight smile the photographers loved, the one that suggested confidence bordering on arrogance, the desert fox in his element, master of mobile warfare, the general who made the British retreat 400 kilometers across Libya with a force half the size of theirs. That man feels like a stranger now. Someone you knew once but can no longer quite remember, like a friend from childhood whose face has blurred in memory until only the impression of friendship remains. That man believed in victory, in the righteousness of the cause, in the clean mathematics of tactics and strategy, where problems had solutions and leadership meant clarity of purpose. That man had not yet seen what you have seen. The systematic murder dressed up as policy, the contempt for human life that flows from Berlin like sewage from a broken pipe, the particular madness of leaders who would rather watch Germany burn than admit defeat. Lucy brings you coffee, real coffee, impossibly precious in October 1944, when most of Germany subsists on ersatz made from acorns and chicory. She has saved it for months, hoarding it against some unspecified future emergency, and now she serves it to you each morning with hands that shake just slightly, just enough to make the cup rattle against the saucer.
She says nothing about the men who came yesterday, 2 officers from the Wehrmacht in a Mercedes staff car that sat in your driveway like a hearse waiting for a body. They were polite, exquisitely polite in the way that Germans have perfected, that particular courtesy that serves as a scabbard for the blade. They asked about your health, expressed concern about your recovery, mentioned that the Führer himself had inquired about your condition. And beneath their words you heard the other conversation, the real message delivered in pauses and careful phrasing. You are being watched. You are suspected. Your continued existence is a matter under review. You drink the coffee and taste betrayal. Not your betrayal, but theirs, the slow accumulation of broken promises that began long before July 20th, long before Stauffenberg's bomb. You remember the meeting in March in the Burghof in Berchtesgaden, Hitler pacing the room with that manic energy that has replaced strategic thinking, his hands trembling from what the doctors pretend not to notice, his eyes bright with pharmaceutical assistance and messianic delusion. You told him the truth then, that the invasion would come, that the Atlantic Wall was a fiction, that Germany lacked the resources to defend both the eastern and western fronts, and he looked at you with something that might have been pity or contempt, and told you that miracles were coming, that new weapons would change everything, that faith would triumph over mathematics. You said nothing more. What could you say to a man who has confused will with reality, who believes that dedication can substitute for divisions, that conviction can replace the 3 million tons of oil Germany no longer has? You left that meeting understanding that the war was lost, that continuation meant only the multiplication of corpses, German and otherwise, until the Allies finished what they had already won. But understanding and speaking are different countries, and the border between them is patrolled by the Gestapo, by Heinrich Himmler's SS, by the apparatus of surveillance that has turned Germany into a nation of whispers and sidewise glances. You spoke anyway, not to conspirators, but to other officers, men you trusted with the particular trust that soldiers share when they have seen too much death to pretend it has meaning. You said that someone needed to end this, that Hitler was leading Germany to annihilation, that duty to the nation superseded duty to a man. And those words, spoken in confidence between men who had bled together, have traveled through channels you did not anticipate, have reached ears you did not intend, have transformed you from hero to liability in the span of months. Manfred appears at breakfast, his hair uncombed, his face still soft with sleep, and you watch him eat the black bread and margarine with the unconscious appetite of youth. He asks about the men who came yesterday, his voice casual, but his eyes too sharp, too observant. He is 15 but seems older, has seemed older since the bombing raids began hitting Ulm, since he started volunteering with the fire brigade and came home smelling of smoke and worse things, his hands black with ash from buildings that used to house families, that used to have names. You tell him they were just checking on your recovery, a lie so transparent it insults you both. But what else can you say? That his father is suspected of treason? That the regime is deciding whether a war hero is worth alive or dead? That history is a mechanism that grinds human beings into dust and calls it progress? The October morning continues, ordinary and terrible, and you sit at your breakfast table in Herlingen, a small town in southern Germany, where the war feels distant until it feels suffocatingly close, waiting for the next polite visit, the next careful conversation, the next step in a dance whose ending you can already see, clear as the autumn light falling across your dying garden.
You received the summons on October 7th.
Not a summons exactly, but an invitation wrapped in the language of concern. A letter on official Wehrmacht stationery suggesting that you appear before a court of honor to address certain irregularities, certain questions that have arisen regarding your loyalty to the Reich. The paper is crisp and clean, the typeface perfect, and you hold it in your hands, knowing that courts of honor in October 1944 are not courts at all, but administrative machinery designed to strip officers of rank before executing them, to provide the veneer of legality to what is essentially murder dressed in procedure. The names arrive like a drumbeat. Field Marshal von Witzleben, hanged. General Beck, forced to shoot himself. Colonel von Stauffenberg, executed by firing squad in the courtyard of the Bendler Block in Berlin within hours of the failed assassination. Over 5,000 arrested in the purge that followed July 20th. The Gestapo working with the efficiency of men who understand that fear requires spectacle, that terror must be visible to be effective. They hang them with piano wire from meat hooks. These generals and colonels and staff officers hang them slowly so death takes minutes instead of seconds, and they film it so Hitler can watch in his private cinema, can see the price of disloyalty rendered in the jerking spasms of men choking out their final moments. You know this because knowledge travels even in a police state, especially in a police state where whispers become the primary currency of truth. Officers who survive the purge speak in careful code, mentioning vacations from which colleagues never return, transfers to the Eastern Front that everyone understands are one-way journeys. The message is clear as the autumn sky. Dissent is death, and death comes wearing the mask of justice. Your name has not appeared on the official lists, not yet, but you feel the net drawing tighter. Feel the slow constriction of options closing like a fist around your throat. Phone calls that disconnect when you answer. Mail that arrives opened and clumsily resealed. The gardener who has worked for you for 3 years suddenly replaced by a younger man whose eyes follow you too carefully, whose hands seem more accustomed to weapons than to pruning shears. On October 10th, General Wilhelm Burgdorf calls, his voice jovial in the way that rings false, asking about your health with the excessive concern of a doctor visiting a terminal patient. He mentions that he will be in the area soon, that he would like to visit, to see for himself how your recovery progresses. You know Burgdorf, Hitler's chief adjutant, a party loyalist who has risen through proximity to power rather than military competence, a man who understands that his position depends on unwavering obedience to a regime that has elevated obedience to the status of theology. You tell him you would be honored by his visit. What else can you say? And when you hang up the phone, your hands are shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the accumulated weight of knowing, of understanding the machinery in motion, of seeing with perfect clarity the trap closing around you while being powerless to prevent it. Lucy finds you in the study, staring at the map of Normandy still pinned to the wall, the coastline marked with your defensive positions, the arrows showing where you predicted the invasion would come. You were right about almost everything, right about the location, right about the timing, right about Germany's inability to repel a concentrated Allied assault. But being right matters nothing when the men making decisions have divorced themselves from reality, when strategy has been replaced by ideology, when the question is no longer how to win, but how long the dying can be prolonged. She sits beside you without speaking, her hand finding yours with the automatic intimacy of 28 years of marriage, of a life built together through the Great War and Weimar and the rise of Nazi socialism, through the victories in France and the defeats in Africa,
through all the small accumulations of joy and sorrow that constitute a shared existence. She knows. You have not told her explicitly, but she knows the way wives know when their husbands carry death inside them like a tumor, when the future has narrowed to a point so fine it can no longer sustain hope. They're coming, you say, and it is not a question. The words hang in the air like smoke, and she squeezes your hand tighter, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small, so seemingly delicate. When? She asks. Soon, you tell her, because that is the only honest answer. Soon could be tomorrow, or next week, or the week after, but soon is inevitable as autumn becoming winter, as the leaves falling from the trees in the garden where you walked just yesterday, where the roses continue their slow death despite your careful tending. You think about the choices that led here, not the large choices, not the decision to join the army in 1910 or to serve the regime that came to power in 1933, but the smaller choices, the accumulation of moments when you could have remained silent and instead spoke truth. The meeting with General von Kluge where you discussed the impossibility of holding Normandy. The conversation with Lieutenant General Speidel about the necessity of making peace. The letter you wrote but never sent, outlining a plan for approaching the Allies, for negotiating Germany's surrender before surrender became annihilation. Each word a nail, each conversation a link in the chain, each moment of honesty a step closer to this October afternoon in Herlingen, where you sit beside your wife and wait for men to arrive with their polite voices and their hidden orders, their official papers and their unofficial ultimatums. Outside, Manfred plays with the neighbor's dog, his laughter carrying through the window like something from another world, from the country of the young, where the future still exists in more than theoretical terms. You watch him and feel the particular agony of a father who understands he will not see his son become a man, will not be there to guide him through the wreckage of the Germany you helped create, the ruins you leave behind. The telephone rings again, and Lucy flinches at the sound, but when you answer, it is only a wrong number, someone asking for Herr Schmidt, who does not live here, has never lived here. You hang up and return to the study, to the maps and the photographs and the accumulated evidence of a military career that once meant something, that earned you the Pourli Mérite in the First War and Field Marshal rank in the Second, that made you famous enough that your name still carries weight, even as that weight becomes the instrument of your destruction. The sun moves across the sky, indifferent to human drama, and the shadows lengthen across Herlingen, and you wait, because waiting is all that remains, waiting and the small mercy of knowing, of seeing clearly what is coming, of having time, however brief, to say goodbye to the garden and the roses, to your wife and your son, to the version of yourself that believed honor and duty could coexist, that thought serving Germany meant something pure and uncomplicated, that did not yet understand how easily principles become excuses, how quickly heroes become cautionary tales.
You see the car first, a black Mercedes staff car appearing at the end of the lane at precisely 1400 hours on October 14th, 1944, moving slowly as if giving you time to understand, time to prepare, time to make whatever peace a man can make in the minutes between knowing and experiencing. The autumn sun catches the chrome and turns it into daggers of light, and you stand at the window watching their approach with the strange calm that comes when anticipation finally resolves into certainty. Two men emerge, General Wilhelm Bergdorf, heavyset and sweating despite the cool October temperature of 11 degrees Celsius,
his uniform immaculate, but his face carrying the particular exhaustion of men who have spent too many hours in the presence of madness. And General Ernst Meisel, thinner, quieter, his eyes avoiding yours even from this distance. They walk slowly up the path you have walked 1,000 times, past the roses that have finally surrendered to the season, their petals brown and curled, like hands closing into fists. Lucy stands beside you, her hand trembling against your arm, and you turn to her with a clarity that feels almost supernatural, as if the approach of death has burned away everything extraneous, leaving only the essential truth of what matters. "Take Manfred upstairs," you say, your voice steady in a way that surprises you both. "Whatever happens, keep him upstairs." She understands, has always understood the unspoken languages of crisis. She kisses you once, her lips dry and cold against your cheek, and then she is moving, calling for Manfred with a brightness in her voice that costs her everything, that uses the last reserves of strength a mother possesses when protecting her child from knowledge that will scar him regardless, but might scar less if witnessed from a distance. You open the door before they knock, a small assertion of control in a situation where control has become theoretical. Bergdorf's smile is professional, practiced, the kind of smile that has been deployed at 1,000 difficult conversations. "Herr Feldmarschall," he says, and the use of your title is itself a message, a reminder of what you stand to lose, what you have already lost. They enter your study, declining the offer of coffee with polite gestures that suggest time is limited, that this visit operates on a schedule determined elsewhere. Bergdorf settles his bulk into the chair across from your desk, while Meisel stands by the window, his role apparently that of witness, of official observer to whatever transaction is about to occur. "Your name has come up," Bergdorf begins, and the euphemism is so delicate it almost makes you laugh. Come up, as if your name were a flower growing in a garden, rather than an entry on a death list compiled by Heinrich Himmler's Gestapo. In connection with the events of July 20th, certain statements you made, certain associations that have been documented. You say nothing, waiting, because this is theater, and theater has rhythms that must be observed, scripts that must be followed, even when all parties know the ending. "The Führer," Bergdorf continues, and his voice drops when he speaks the title, becomes reverent in a way that might be genuine or might be the self-protective reflex of a man who has learned that skepticism is dangerous, has been informed of your involvement, indirect involvement perhaps, but involvement nonetheless, in discussions of removing him from power, of making unauthorized peace overtures to the enemy. The charges hang in the air like poison gas, invisible but lethal, and you consider your options with the tactical mind that once made you famous. You could deny, demand evidence, insist on your loyalty with the passionate conviction of the wrongly accused, but denial requires the belief that truth matters, that evidence is necessary, that the machinery of justice still functions beneath the machinery of power. And you know better, have known better since the first whispers reached you of officers arrested on the basis of overheard conversations, of suspicions treated as confessions, of the Gestapo's preferred method of interrogation that involves pain applied until the accused tells them what they wish to hear. "I served Germany," you say, and the words taste like ash, because served is past tense, is admission, is the grammar of endings. "I have always served Germany, but Germany and the Führer are not the same thing." Bergdorf's face hardens, the professional courtesy cracking just enough to reveal the contempt beneath. That distinction, he says, is treason. And there it is, the word finally spoken, treason, the charge that carries with it the full weight of the regime's machinery of death. You think of the meat hooks in Plötzensee prison in Berlin, of the piano wire that takes 8 minutes to strangle a man if applied correctly, of the cameras recording every moment for Hitler's evening entertainment. You think of Lucy and Manfred, of what happens to the families of traitors in the new Germany that has learned to punish blood itself, to make guilt hereditary. Bergdorf reaches into his briefcase, the leather worn smooth from use, from carrying documents to similar meetings in similar rooms across Germany. He withdraws 2 items, a sheet of paper and a small wooden box, dark walnut polished to a dull sheen. The Führer, in his mercy, Bergdorf says, and the mercy lands like a stone, offers you a choice. You may stand trial before the People's Court, where your case will be heard and judged according to law, or you may choose the honorable course. He opens the wooden box. Inside, nested in black velvet, is a glass vial containing cyanide. 2 capsules, each one containing enough potassium cyanide to kill a man in 4 minutes, to stop the heart and cease the brain with the efficiency of chemistry untroubled by conscience or mercy. If you choose the latter, Bergdorf continues, his voice now entirely bureaucratic, reading from a script prepared by men who have thought through every detail. Your death will be announced as the result of your injuries from the July attack. You will be given a state funeral with full military honors. Your rank and decorations will remain intact. Your family will receive your full pension and will be protected from any consequences of your associations. The mathematics are elegant, cruel but elegant. Your death in exchange for your legacy. Your silence in exchange for Lucy's safety, for Manfred's future. Your compliance in your own murder, dressed up as suicide, dressed up as honorable sacrifice. And if I refuse, you ask, though you know the answer. Then you will be arrested, Bergdorf says, tried, convicted, and executed. Your family will be subject to Sippenhaft. The Reich has many camps where the families of traitors can contemplate the meaning of loyalty. Sippenhaft, kin liability, the medieval principle resurrected by a regime that has discovered that the most effective way to ensure obedience is to make every individual responsible for the loyalty of everyone they love. You imagine Lucy in Ravensbrück, Manfred in Sachsenhausen, their lives reduced to the gray existence of political prisoners whose only crime was being related to you. There is no choice. There was never a choice. The machinery was set in motion the moment you spoke truth in a nation that had made truth subordinate to ideology. You are 52 years old, a field marshal of the Wehrmacht, holder of the Pour le Mérite, the man they called the Desert Fox, and you have been reduced to this, a conversation in your study about the most efficient method of your own elimination. You reach for the wooden box, your hand steady, and Bergdorf nods with something that might be respect or might be relief that this unpleasant task is proceeding on schedule. 3 hours, he says, to put your affairs in order. They leave, their footsteps receding down the path, the Mercedes engine starting with a cough, and you are alone with the wooden box and the certainty of ending, alone with the impossible task of saying goodbye.
You climb the stairs, each step a small mountain, each breath a victory against the gravity of what you carry. And you find Lucy in the bedroom where she has been waiting with Manfred, her arm around his shoulders, her face composed in that terrible way that only comes when composure is the last gift you can offer someone you love. She sees your face and understands immediately, has perhaps understood since the moment the black Mercedes appeared at the end of the lane, since the moment you first spoke of men coming, of choices narrowing, of futures collapsing into a single point too small to contain hope. "Mama, what's happening?" Manfred asks, his voice cracking between boyhood and whatever comes after, between the innocence you wanted to preserve and the knowledge that is being forced upon him like poison down a resisting throat. He is 15 years old, tall and lean, with your eyes and Lucy's stubbornness, and he deserves a father who will see him turn 16, 17, 20, who will teach him to drive and to shave and to navigate the impossible complexity of becoming a man in a world that has not yet learned to stop destroying its young. You kneel before him, ignoring the protest from your damaged skull, the headache that has become the background music of your existence, and you take his hands in yours, feeling the solaces he has earned from the fire brigade, from pulling bodies from collapsed buildings in Ulm, from learning too early that the world is not gentle and does not promise fairness. "I have to go away," you tell him, and the inadequacy of the words makes you want to weep. "The injuries from July, they are worse than we thought." It is a lie and a truth tangled together like roots beneath soil. The injuries are indeed killing you, just not in the way the official story will claim. Not the fractures themselves, but what they represent. The inconvenience of a war hero who survived long enough to develop a conscience, who saw too much and spoke too freely, and forgot that in the Reich of 1944, survival depends on selective blindness, on the ability to unsee what is plainly visible. Manfred's eyes fill, and you watch the tears gather and spill, and you memorize this moment because it is the last time you will see your son cry, the last time you will be able to offer the false comfort that fathers provide, the lies about everything being all right when nothing is all right, and has not been all right for years. "No," he says, and the word is both plea and denial. "The doctor said you were recovering. They said—" "Doctors are sometimes wrong," you interrupt, gently but firmly, establishing the narrative that will protect him, that will allow him to grieve without understanding, to mourn without becoming complicit in the truth. "I need you to be strong, to take care of your mother, to remember that honor means something, even when the world has forgotten what honor is." You embrace him, feeling his body shake against yours, feeling the future you will never witness pressing against the present you must abandon. And over his shoulder you see Lucy watching with a face that has aged a decade in an afternoon, that shows every year of the 28 you have spent together, every compromise and accommodation, every small death that led to this larger one. When you release Manfred, when Lucy leads him gently from the room with whispered promises of tea and the small mercies of distraction, you are alone. Alone with the wooden box on the desk, with the glass vials that contain your officially sanctioned ending, with the window that shows the garden where the roses have finished dying, and the October light falls golden and indifferent across the southern German hills. You write 2 letters, the first to Lucy, telling her what she already knows, that you love her,
that the life you built together was the only thing that mattered in the end, that she should remember you not as the desert fox or the field marshal, but as the man who loved her clumsily and completely for nearly 29 years. The second to Manfred, to be opened when he is older, when the Reich has fallen as it must fall, as empires built on terror and ideology always fall, telling him that you died because you chose conscience over compliance, that sometimes the only honor left is in refusing to pretend, that he should judge you not by the uniform you wore, but by the choice you made when choice became impossible. At precisely 1700 hours, as the sun begins its descent and the shadows lengthen across Herlingen, you walk into the garden for the last time. The air is cool, perhaps 10 degrees Celsius, and carries the scent of earth preparing for winter, of things ending and other things waiting in the dark soil for spring that you will never see. The roses are skeletal now, their thorns sharp against the dimming sky, and you think about how something so beautiful requires such violent defenses, how nature understands what humans forget, that survival and destruction are woven in the same root system. Lucy joins you, her hand finding yours with the automatic grace of long marriage. You walk together in silence because words have become inadequate, because language fails at the boundary between living and dying, because some moments exist beyond the reach of speech. The garden is small, perhaps 20 meters square, but it contains everything. The roses you planted the year Manfred was born, the stone bench where you sat reading letters from the front when the war was still something you believed in, the apple tree that produces fruit too bitter to eat, but too beautiful to cut down. I wanted more time, you say, and it is simultaneously the truest and most obvious thing you have ever spoken. More time to watch Manfred become whatever he will become, more time to grow old with Lucy, more time to see whether Germany can salvage something from the ruins of its own making. But time is not democratic, does not distribute itself according to need or fairness, simply flows forward with the mechanical indifference of a river that does not care what it carries or what it drowns. We had enough time to love each other, Lucy says, and her voice breaks on the word love, fractures like ice under pressure. We will have to have enough. You hold her, there in the garden as the light fails, and you think about all the gardens you will never see, all the autumns that will come without you, all the springs where the roses will bloom for eyes other than your own. You think about the war that will continue for another 7 months, grinding Germany into rubble and ash, proving that you were right about everything except the ability of right to matter when power has divorced itself from reason. You think about Stalingrad and El Alamein, about the hundreds of thousands who died under your command, who trusted that your orders served some larger purpose than feeding the machinery of empire. And you wonder if they would forgive you for dying this way, for choosing poison over testimony, silence over truth. At 17:30 hours, you return inside. You drink a glass of water, ordinary tap water from the Herlingen municipal supply, cool and tasteless and unremarkable, and then you bite down on the glass capsule, feeling it break between your molars, tasting the bitter almond scent of cyanide as it floods your mouth and throat. 4 minutes, that is what they promise. 4 minutes for the poison to stop your heart, to shut down the autonomic systems that have kept you breathing and circulating blood for 52 years without conscious effort. You lie on the sofa in your study, the same sofa where you have napped countless afternoons, where you dozed when Manfred played at your feet when he was small enough that playing meant building towers from wooden blocks. Lucy sits beside you, her hand on your chest, feeling your heartbeat slow and stutter and finally stop. The pain is less than expected, or perhaps pain has become so familiar that this final pain registers as just another variation on the theme. Your vision narrows, tunneling toward darkness, and the last thing you see is Lucy's face,
tears streaming but expression steady, giving you this final gift of witnessing your death without flinching, without looking away, proving that love means staying present, even when presence requires enduring the unendurable. 79 years later, historians will debate your legacy with the passionate intensity of people arguing about someone they have never met, someone who exists for them only as documents and photographs and the contested territory of interpretation. Some will call you a hero who resisted tyranny, others a complicit participant who objected too late and too quietly. They will examine your campaigns in North Africa with the cold precision of chess matches, analyzing tactics while forgetting the men who died implementing them. They will argue about what you knew and when you knew it, about whether your opposition to Hitler was moral or merely practical, about whether choosing death over complicity redeems or merely complicates your participation in atrocity. But in this moment, in your garden in Herlingden, as October twilight settles over southern Germany, you are not history, but simply a man dying, a father leaving his son, a husband releasing his wife's hand, a human being discovering that the end, when it comes, is both more ordinary and more terrible than imagination ever suggested. You are Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, Field Marshal of the Wehrmacht, and you are also just Erwin, 52 years old, tired beyond measure, choosing the only choice left when all other choices have been stripped away. The darkness comes, not gradually, but suddenly, like a door closing, and the garden continues without you. The roses decay into soil, the apple tree loses its leaves, winter arrives and departs and arrives again. Life continues its relentless continuation, indifferent to your absence, proving what you always suspected but never wanted to believe, that the world does not pause for individual deaths, that history is written by the living about the dead, that meaning is something imposed retroactively by people who need the past to make sense even when sense is impossible. And somewhere, in the space between memory and forgetting, your story becomes our story, a reminder that heroism and complicity can exist in the same heart, that conscience awakened late is still conscience, that the final choice, when all choices are impossible, is still a choice. You are not redeemed by your death. Redemption is too simple, too clean for the complexity of what you were and what you served. But perhaps there is something in the choosing, in the refusal at the end to pretend, to comply, to accept the official story, even when the official story offers survival. The garden remembers, the soil holds your footsteps, and the October light continues to fall, golden and mournful, across the place where you said goodbye, to your son, to your wife, to yourself. One breath, one heartbeat, one final,
ordinary, extraordinary moment at a time.